Good evening. This is Peter Helland with Dr. E. Michael Jones on the show Israel. And if you see the title on there, it probably says the oligarchs versus the people, which is similar to the title of your May edition, How the Oligarchs Got Their Power. And that, you're able to speak on it because you wrote the big book called Barren Metal, which goes through all what capitalism is, or you're tracing the money
right
all the way up.
Yeah.
I mean, you traced, you had the spirit of the revolutionary Jew, and you traced the Jewish activity from Christ up till now, and then you traced the money activity, and those two seem to intersect a lot.
Yeah, they do. They do.
I always like to give a scripture of, because we're dealing with the sin of covetousness. I mean, from my perspective, I mean, you lay it out because you're tracking it, but underneath the problem we're having here with usury is covetousness. And in the Old Testament, it says, God says, I dwell in the high and holy place with him also that is of a contrite and humble spirit. And then he goes into the opposite. For the iniquity of his covetousness was I wroth. So in the Old Testament, New Testament, God, for his reasons, hates covetousness, which has many definitions, but one of them is, the main one is desiring more than what you need,
Yes.
grasping after more than what you need,
Yeah.
and its opposite would be generosity.
Right.
Okay, no, that plays underneath all that we're saying, that principle.
Yeah.
When it's violated.
Yeah. Right. And covetousness is against God because you're not relying on divine providence. You're relying on money. You're relying on the resources that you have so that you don't need God. And you can do what you want and disregard God because you have enough resources to take care of yourself. Or at least that's the way you think. That's what the guy who had the barn, and he decided to build another barn because at that point he was going to eat, drink, and be merry, and he didn't need God, and God took him that night. Called him a fool.
Well, in the epistle in Galatians, Colossians, and Ephesians, it gives a list of the bad sins, and the first 3 or 4 are sexual sins, and in all 3, after it lists the sexual sins, it says covetousness, which is idolatry.
Right.
Okay.
So we have, as Americans, we have the best of both worlds. We have a country that is based on sodomy and usury. And in previous programs, we've talked about the connection between sodomy and usury. It's very clear right now. We have a moment. This is why it's important to be tuned in at this point, because you have a moment where the situation is becoming very clear. The relationship between sodomy and usury is perfectly clear now to anyone with the eyes to see in America. It began last year when the CEOs parachuted into Indianapolis and told the government of Indiana that they were the boss and you guys have to change the law because it discriminates against homosexuals. So what you see here is a cabal of CEOs and homosexuals.
Can we make it easier to say, like, the word sodomy, they isolated, but it seems like sodomy is the culmination of sexual mispractice.
That's right. It's the worst. It's the absolute worst thing that you can do.
So anytime you're violating the sexual code, then you're heading in that direction.
There's a gradation here of sin. They're all bad. We have to call them all sin. Fornication is bad. It's a sin. It causes the death of the soul. Adultery is worse because you're breaking a vow that you made, okay? But the worse than both of them is sodomy. And why is sodomy worse? Because you're attacking God. You're going against God's plan, because God's plan is that sexual activity has to be open to life. It was created to create new life, and you are deliberately defying God by engaging in activities that can in no possible way lead to life.
But it's also, people are going to say, well, I don't practice sodomy. Well, you're in the same ball field if you're violating.
Right. There's only one way to fulfill God's plan, and that is when sexual activity is in marriage and open to life. Anything else is thwarting God's plan. And so you can thwart it one way or the other, but the most serious and grievous and horrible way that you can thwart it is by sodomy, by homosexual activity, because homosexual activity is not just a sin of passion, it's sacrilege. It's attacking something sacred. It's a deliberate violation of something sacred, as if you were to take the sacred vessels. You remember this story from the Bible?
Yeah.
Take the sacred vessels and use them for your Thanksgiving dinner. Belshazzar's feast. It wasn't Thanksgiving, but it was, and he was just showing how powerful he was, because he could take these sacred vessels and pass them around to his friends, and they could laugh and joke about them, and then suddenly the hand started writing on the wall because you had done something wrong.
So there is a real parallel.
So that's exactly what homosexuality is. You're defying God. You're defying the plan that God made, and you're adding sacrilege to the sin of passion. So it's a horrible thing, but from our perspective, from the perspective of the oligarchs, it's good because these people are so controlled by their passions that they're easily manipulated. They have this, the homosexual is neurotic. He is the slave of this narcissistic fantasy. He's always fantasizing that people are against him because of his behavior. In other words, why is the world persecuting me? Why do they dislike me? It's because they're discriminating. No, it's because you're doing something really, really wrong. And normal people are appalled at that. So what you have here is a campaign to destroy that feeling among the population.
Well, if you violate this sexual code in any way, you're not going to feel comfortable.
No, you'll feel guilty. And
Yeah.
the guilt, even something as tame, I don't want to minimize it, but as tame as adultery, we have the famous novel by Nathaniel Hawthorne, The Scarlet Letter, which is about adultery, about the Puritan minister who has to be a saint because he's a Puritan.
Higher standard,
and we only let the saints into our church, and he's committed a sin. So what do you do when you're a saint and you've committed a mortal sin? Well, you've agonized a lot. And so there was the famous scene where he goes on the scaffold after Hester has been on the scaffold, made to wear the A. He goes on the scaffold and rips open his shirt. And we don't know exactly what he's showing, but it must be something like the A. But no one can see him because it's the middle of the night. But he has this compulsion, to exhibit his guilt, to bring his guilt out into the open, because that's the only way you're going to get rid of it. You have to sort of confess it, bring it out.
Well, our body is now the temple of the Holy Spirit. They had the temple, and now we're the temple of the Holy Spirit. So there's a real burden on us to be holy.
Right, and we know when we're not. And so how do you react? You react by political activism. So the homosexuals are crushed by this guilt. They know they're doing something wrong. They know they're going against God's plan, and they can't stand it to be by themselves. And as the saying goes, misery loves company, and so they form political movements. Once they form a political movement, the oligarchs can then come in and use them as their proxy warriors, which is exactly what's going on. What went on in Indiana a year ago, the oligarchs used the homosexuals as their proxy warriors to overthrow representative government in the state of Indiana. That was the real story. Unfortunately, the governor missed it completely. He could have been a hero as the first guy to stand up to it, but he blew it. He just didn't understand what was going on.
Well, the first people ask is, how can 3% of the population get so much control?
Wait a minute. Wait. Who's the what are you talking about? 3%.
3% are practicing homosexuality. Okay. But,
wait a minute. I dispute that. They did studies when the AIDS thing came out. It's between 1% and 2%. So you're about doubling the number here.
But if the majority of people are also practicing sexual immorality, then subtly or hidden, they're supporting the sodomites because they don't want to come to the light.
Right.
So they have a.
So you're right. The majority is weakened, and so in an era when there would be strong sexual morality, no one would tolerate this, and we wouldn't be subjected to it. So the thin end of the wedge was, of course, contraception, which sterilizes the sexual act and makes it unfruitful. So once you accept that as legitimate, then how can you say that homosexual activity is wrong? You can't, and that's how we got into this bind. Large
So
acceptance.
very few people are opposing it, and even the governors, they oppose it.
No one can oppose contraception. You would be taken out and shot as un-American if you did that. But that's, of course, what led to it. So what we have now is a situation where the oligarchs are now drunk with power. They are drunk with power because they've gotten their way for so long that they are not going to take no for an answer. And they're not going to put up with any redneck from Indiana or Georgia or Mississippi or Texas who thinks that he can elect a representative that will represent his interest. The state legislature is allowed to represent the interest of the people of the state as long as they don't contradict the will of the oligarchs. Well, the problem is here is the oligarchs know this, and they're pushing their agenda. So in the year since we talked about this a year ago, we were prophetic.
Yeah.
We talked about this a year ago. We were completely prophetic in saying this was an attack on representative government. When they won in Indiana, they just expanded. It's the same guy. It's Mark Benioff, the head of Salesforce, parachuted into Indianapolis.
From San Francisco.
From San Francisco, and now he's doing the same thing in Georgia, North Carolina, Mississippi. It's the same program. And the same question applies. Wait a minute. This guy doesn't live in Indiana. What gave this guy from San Francisco the right to overturn the laws of the state of Indiana? Well, the answer is he has no right. He's got money. He's got celebrities that show up at his big parties. And that's in a culture that's run by the media. That gives him all the credentials that he needs. There was a fawning portrait of him in the Wall Street Journal. Well, why the Wall Street? Does that mean he's conservative? No, that doesn't. What it means is that the Wall Street Journal represents the interest of the oligarchs. And so the situation we're confronted with right now is a conflict between the people and the oligarchs. And it's not a new conflict. It goes all the way back to the founding of the United States of America, which was created by oligarchs, for oligarchs, and of the oligarchs.
Because it was a fraudulent.
Well, it was the oligarchs at that time were known as creditors. And creditors did not like paper money. They wanted gold and silver money. And so as soon as they established their government, they immediately got involved in a swindle. The biggest swindle at the beginning of the government was basically these guys, these vultures of their day, would buy up bonds, continentals from the widows of Revolutionary War veterans. They'd accumulate this huge capital, and then they go to the government and say, we want this redeemed. They bought it up at 10 cents on the dollar, and they come back now and say, we want full face value in gold, and the government does it, and the people are outraged.
Because they couldn't do it.
Because they couldn't. And so now you've got a rebellion. The people rise up. The same revolutionary soldiers are now fighting again. It's called Shays' Rebellion. And Washington now has to crush Shays' Rebellion. Well, the same thing happened in our day in 2008. Exactly the same thing. The stooges of the oligarchs. Bill Clinton is a stooge of the oligarchs. He repealed Glass-Steagall. He gave us GATT and NAFTA. He was a total lackey, boot-licking stooge of the oligarchs, did whatever they wanted. And once Glass-Steagall got repealed, the banks got into speculating. And once they speculated, they got into big, big debts. And the debts all went bad. And the crash came. And so what happens then in the Obama administration brings in Paul Geithner, and he connives with Goldman Sachs to put AIG out of business because AIG was not going to pay up. And there was going to be a bankruptcy filing. And in a bankruptcy filing, Goldman Sachs will have to prove that it was owed so much, such and such money. And after they proved that, then there was going to be the haircut. And they were going to say basically, okay, that's good, you can prove that, but all we can offer you is 10 cents on the dollar. And normal situation was, well, okay, we think we should get 12 cents on the dollar. And they say, okay, 11 cents on the dollar, and then it's all done. And then the debts are cleared away, and everything starts all over again.
That's how it's done every place
That's
else.
a standard capitalist procedure. This is not St. Francis of Assisi coming in here and reforming the system. Okay? So what does Obama do? He guarantees these crooks full face value on their crooked loans.
When they should get at the most 12%.
Whatever, they should have taken a haircut. Whatever, this is standard capitalist procedure. You're a bondholder, you know there's risk involved, you take a haircut. End of story, start over. No. And so what happened is that we were saddled with these bad debts. They were given $1 trillion to make them whole, okay? And we are saddled with mortgages for properties that are underwater. We're paying off $200,000 mortgages on $75,000 houses now. Well, that's going to kill the economy. It is killing the economy. And even the citizens of the state of Indiana have figured this out. These are the people that 4 years ago voted for Mitt Romney. Can you believe this? And now there's a new consciousness because people are seeing now that the oligarchs are drunk with power and they're going to destroy this country and we're not going to take it anymore. And so what you had in Indiana was a protest vote. Trump won and Bernie Sanders won. These are both protest votes. Everyone thought that Ted Cruz was supposed to win in Indiana because of all these evangelicals. Well, guess what? Evangelicals work for a living. And they're all getting screwed by their employers. And so the great divine intervention at this time was Carrier announces that it's moving its air conditioning plant to Mexico. It takes a genius. Who is the genius at Carrier that decided to announce this right at the time when the primary is being decided? Some great public relations genius. They should put this guy in the Public Relations Hall of Fame.
Maybe Trump paid him because that was a perfect.
So both Bernie and Trump have a real live issue that they can work with. And you were there at the hall. You know, whenever he talked about Carrier, there was a roar from the crowd because they were furious at and they've had enough. We've had enough. So these are the people, as I said, that voted for Mitt Romney 4 years ago. This is a huge change from voting for Mitt Romney. I mean, if there were ever an oligarch looter, it's Mitt Romney.
Okay. The title of your article is How the Oligarchs Got Their Power. Could you almost say how the oligarchs got their money? Because at 9/11, the debt was $5.6 trillion. Now it's almost, 19 trillion? How did they increase? Who got the money and how did it?
Okay, power is money. In a capitalist country, power is money. So how you got your power, I have to explain to you how you got your money. And the answer to that is usury. It's always the same answer. It's usury. That's what it was at the time of Alexander Hamilton, and that's what it is now.
Did anybody expect in 2001 that the debt would go from 5.6?
Well, if they didn't, they were idiots, because you can't engage in a war of that magnitude without debt. It's a cost $1 trillion. And again, a sign of the consciousness that has taken place is when Jeb Bush, why wasn't Jeb Bush the nominee? Why wasn't he the nominee?
People didn't like
He's
Bush.
better looking than George, right?
Yeah, but
why not? You had two Bushes already. Why not a third? Well, Jeb stood up and he defended his brother, and his brother, he said to Trump, "You were doing a reality show when my brother was defending the country with the war in Iraq." And Trump just came back and said what everybody knows is the war in Iraq was the biggest mistake in foreign policy history in the United States. And Jeb didn't know what to say. Brought up his mother, and then Trump said, well, your mother should run for president. So in a sense, he was just demolished because the level of consciousness has reached the point that nobody believes that anymore. Nobody believes this terrorist fiction that you were spreading about there. It was a mistake, and it was orchestrated by oligarchs for their interests, primarily Israel, but also the oligarchs like the Cheneys and the Rumsfelds who had were representing the big companies who were making a killing by the privatization of the war over there. So we all know that we have reached that level of consciousness, and these things don't fly anymore. So that's good. That's good.
Everybody says, since Christ, maybe 100 times, nations have just told the Jews, get out of the country. And so you see a clear reaction when they go into debt. And usually it's because they've been put in debt by the usurers, and the usurers were
Right.
usually Jewish. And the people just rose up, once they got a king that couldn't be bribed, they rose up and said, "You guys got to go."
Yep. It was the way of clearing your debts.
What's the similarity?
Well, it's the same thing. Same thing. We have these huge debts now. They were all acquired by the state for the interest. Let's say the war debt, let's be specific, the war in Iraq and this whole debacle in the Middle East has been, the primary beneficiary has been the state of Israel. So we're dying. These are the people that in that hall, they're people that sent off their sons and they died in Iraq for the state of Israel, And the propaganda machine has to convince them to wave the flag and say there was some type of we're freedom, but everybody's starting to realize, no, it was for Israel. So this becomes the big question now, okay? What is the alternative? Well, Trump did get it right on April 26 when he gave his foreign policy speech, and he said it was going to be based on America first. Well, he's talking about a moment in American history during the 1930s when the country was still smarting from their involvement in World War I and the wreckage that did for the American economy. Just starting to get out of it. The isolationist feeling is strong in the Midwest, which is the basis, the center of America's manufacturing power. And so the people are rising up. Lots of Germans here.
Well, you had a lot of. We were pro-German before World War I.
Right.
And then you had Gerald Nye, head of the committee that was to investigate why we even went into the war. We kind of like, why did we even go into that war?
Yeah. Well.
And he said it was armaments.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was money.
So you have a strong feeling here of this. What is America? America should serve the interest of Americans. It should not get involved in foreign wars. John Quincy Adams says this in 1821. It's a seminal American feeling. In spite of the fact that the oligarchs were in charge, they still had the sense that we should mind our own business, we should remain neutral in terms of European wars, and we should not get involved in these crusades overseas. Well, that changed with World War I. And now the same people who gave us World War I wanted to give us World War II. And the people had learned from that, and they didn't like it, and these people were called America First.
But the oligarchs can make money by going to those wars. Is that the bottom line?
Yeah, well, the oligarchs lose money if they lose their foreign investments, and so that's part of the reason as well. So there's an internationalist element that lives by banking and usury in Wall Street, and then there's Main Street, which makes its money by manufacturing. And Main Street is the Midwest, and Wall Street is obviously New York City. And so there's been a conflict. It's the same conflict from the beginning, okay? It's the oligarchs versus the people, versus the workers in this instance. Well, the America First came to an abrupt end shortly before this happened. So with Pearl Harbor, it came with an abrupt end with Pearl Harbor. And now we know that Roosevelt orchestrated Pearl Harbor. It was the 9/11 of its day, okay? But before that happened, Charles Lindbergh gave a speech in Iowa. He gave the same one in St. Louis, in which he said there are three groups that are trying to get us into the war. Now, Lindbergh was a certified American hero, flew the Spirit of St. Louis across the Atlantic, a certified hero.
He might have been able to beat Roosevelt in an election. He was that popular.
If he would have run, I think he would have beat him. But anyway, he gives a speech and says there are three groups that are trying to get us into the war: the Roosevelt administration, the British, and the Jews. And as soon as that three-letter word came out of his mouth, he was public enemy number one.
Even though he had people that were watching every word he was writing and was going to speak, and they thought it would be all right.
Yeah.
And it wasn't.
No, because their media power had increased so much, and then obviously their interests were aligned with the internationalist interest of the Roosevelt administration and Wall Street. So they're powerful actors, and they basically they wouldn't have succeeded without Pearl Harbor, but they did have Pearl Harbor, and they did succeed, and they obliterated America First. And so there was a kind of shock wave went up through Wall Street and Washington and Hollywood and the media centers when Trump announced America First. And so the first reaction is 1 day later, the ADL announces that it's anti-Semitic to use the term America First. So now we know. now we know. So here we are, and the lines have been drawn. And so the question is, what is Trump going to do now? Because now he won. When he won in Indiana, we all know Cruz dropped out. When Cruz dropped out, that was the end of the possibility for a brokered convention. That means he's going to win the nomination, and once he wins the nomination, he's got to go to the general election. Okay? So you win in Indiana by saying carrier air conditioning, America first, Main Street, manufacturing jobs, okay? And I believe in all of those things. He was right on all of those things. But now he's faced with the general election, and now he's faced with his, what should we call it, his Jewish problem. He's got a Jewish problem.
Well, you said, and I was in Washington, D.C., they had the AIPAC meeting, and I happened to be there, and with a friend, a common friend, and we were at that AIPAC where Hillary Clinton spoke, Cruz spoke, and Donald Trump spoke, and they were protesting.
Yes.
But you were very upset or disappointed when
First
you
of all,
found out what.
Let's take a step back. Before the AIPAC convention, Trump addresses the American or the Republican Jewish Republicans. This is their organization. So he stands up there and he says, "I don't want your money." Tells the Jews he doesn't want their money. Well, his estimation, in everyone's eyes, rises at this point, because we know what he said. If you give me money, you want to control me. That is the whole point. The American system is now plutocracy, which is to say $1, one vote. And the people with the money control the political process. And one of the biggest controllers of money, bundlers of money in this corrupt system is AIPAC, the Israel lobby.
Well, obviously the Jews gave Judas money, and then 30 pieces, and then they gave the soldiers money to say we fell asleep.
They're good at giving money with strings attached. Okay, so this is what we have now. So first he says that, and suddenly this is consistent with America first, okay? This is consistent with a nationalist policy that's going to withdraw from all of these foreign entanglements and disastrous wars in the Middle East. There's huge sympathy for this at this moment in history, okay? Because our economy, our culture is being destroyed right now. And Indiana knows it, okay? So what does he do then? He goes and speaks to AIPAC, and he undoes everything that he did when he told the Republicans he didn't want their money. So now it's like, which Trump is going to show up? Okay, which Trump is going to show up? Is it the Indiana Trump, or is it the New York Trump? And now we've reached a crucial turning point, because now that he's sewn up the nomination, the big Jew money guys are coming out of the woodwork. And who's the biggest Jew money guy around?
Well, you mentioned it, Adelson.
Sheldon Adelson, the biggest Jew money guy in the Republican Party, and he is now on record as saying he's willing to offer Donald Trump $100 million. As I said, this is a plutocracy. Okay, so you've got, maybe 50 cents in your pocket, and you've got 50 cents to vote. And Sheldon Adelson has billions of votes. So you got a 50-cent vote, and he's got a $50 billion vote. So the question is, what's he going to do? And I forgot to bring my crystal ball, because this is going to be a turning point. Because you can't have it both ways. Okay, it's either America first or it's Israel first. Which is it going to be? You can't have it both ways.
The hope is, he says, I am for free trade, but I'm not for the ridiculous way we're doing it.
That's all good. I agree with him.
So he could say, I am for Israel, but I'm not for Israel in a ridiculous way.
Well, wait a minute. The trouble is, he is for Israel in a ridiculous way.
Right. So we don't have that.
Because in addition to this issue right now, he's just going on talk radio in New York saying, number one, that Benjamin Netanyahu is his best friend, and that he thinks the Israelis should be continuing to make settlements, building their illegal settlements on occupied Palestinian territory. First of all of Israel is occupied Palestinian territory, but contested occupied Palestinian territory. So not only is he pro-Israel, he's pro. I mean, how many friends does Benjamin Netanyahu have, even in Israel? There are lots of people in Israel who don't like him at all.
The-
He's one of the most. Obama can't stand the guy. Okay, well, anyway. But I mean, so we're talking about why is he making extreme statements like this, and assuming that we will see no contradictions here? This is full of contradictions. This has to be resolved. And I'm saying, I'm going on record right now. Okay, if Donald Trump names Newt Gingrich as his vice president, it's over. He lost. It's over, because Newt Gingrich is a creation of Sheldon Adelson. If you remember 4 years ago, do you remember the campaign 4 years ago? Newt Gingrich was the preferred candidate of Sheldon Adelson. Because Newt Gingrich got Sheldon Adelson his casino in Macau. He did the legwork for him. Busted the union. Think about that, Indiana. Union buster.
Yeah,
okay.
but Newt Gingrich had a conversion.
He's
to,
a Catholic.
To Catholic.
He's one of us, Peter. One of us.
Right. So
A Catholic.
why didn't that should have been a transforming moment in all that who he was?
First of all, we need to have a long discussion about the relationship between nature and grace. Okay. We have the old. We all operate under basically.
No, I understand.
We all operate under a basically Lutheran understanding of grace. And Luther, what did Luther say? He said, "Grace is like snow covering shit." Okay, that is not the
imputed
Catholic,
righteousness. Kaboom! Right.
That is not the Catholic understanding. Okay, the Catholic understanding is from Thomas Aquinas. He says, "Grace doesn't destroy nature; it perfects it." So you are what you are. Your sins are forgiven, but you're still a jerk, even though your sins are forgiven. Okay? You're still a drunk. Your hands still shake in the morning when you get up, even though you confess the sin, okay, and so on and so forth. And that's the problem here. Okay? We have lost sense of that. Conversion is like I'm saved. I'm saved. Like Dimsdale, I'm saved. And then what do you do when you commit a mortal sin? Well, I guess it's not a mortal sin, or maybe I'm not saved, or it's one or the other, but you're in trouble. Right. Okay, you got a problem here because you have a fundamentally faulty understanding of the relationship between nature and grace. And that's what's going on here with these conversions of people like Newt Gingrich is still Newt Gingrich. Okay, he's still this conniving politician who's working for Sheldon Adelson, who epitomizes everything wrong with American politics in our day. And if he gets attached to Trump as his vice president, he's put there by Sheldon Adelson to control Trump. This is what happens when
Rahm Emanuel was
right.
put.
This is what happens when you reach a certain stage in the political campaign. The classic example, from my point of view, would be Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was the unstoppable force of 1980. Okay, this was the resurgence of all of the wickedness of capitalism. Margaret Thatcher had done it a year before in England. He's the unstoppable force. He's pro-life. The Catholics are saying Hosanna. And then what happens? He gets George H.W. Bush attached to him as his vice president. Who is George H.W. Bush? What was he famous for before that? He was head of the CIA.
Well, he had to take him. I remember that.
So it was forced on Reagan.
So
watch out. History is destiny here. If Gingrich is attached to Trump, it's over. It's over. This is Sheldon Adelson money. This is remote control Sheldon Adelson. And this means Israel first, not America first. That's the thing as it stands right now. Which way is it going to go? Is it going to be Israel first? Is it going to be America first?
Well, when you heard him talk at IPEC in Washington, D.C., you were already thinking, boy, we're in trouble.
Shocked and dismayed.
Right.
That he took back everything he said before the Republicans.
Right. So it doesn't look.
So it hangs in the balance. It's this and this. This contradicts that. So which way is he going to go? He could go either way, it seems to me. And if he goes with Sheldon Adelson and his $100 million and Newt Gingrich and Israel first, it's over. There's no choice. I'm not the only guy who knows this. I'm not the only guy who knows this.
But in Germany, they said in 1880, the Pope Benedict's great uncle
Georg Ratzinger.
Georg was. They were already saying 1890 that Germany was completely under the control of the Jews, and they tried to get out of it by choosing. They kind of fought fire with fire.
Well,
Trump can't rescue us.
First of all, Georg Ratzinger was the Pope's great uncle. He wrote a book called Jüdisches Erwerbsleben about the Jewish control of finance in Germany at that time. And he said, basically, we have laws created by Christian monarchs against usury. We need to enforce these laws. We have laws against child labor. We need to enforce these laws. Well, why didn't the laws get enforced? Because all of the politicians were in debt to the Jews.
And they were only 1% of the population for Germany, I think.
Whatever they were, they're always a minority. So the situation is the same thing here. If the only reason we're having a discussion here is because Donald Trump has articulated something that is real. There is a real alternative to the mess that we are in, and if you want the two-word code for it, it's America First. In other words, a return to protected manufacturers, a withdrawal from this role as the nation's cop with hundreds of bases all over the world, costing us trillions of dollars to enforce a status quo that is not working and is only causing us enemies. Are we going to pursue that? If you elect Hillary, you will get worse than what you have now. All you have to look is what Hillary did in Libya. And you realize what a bloodthirsty monster this lady is. She makes Lady Macbeth look like Mary Poppins.
Well, somebody was saying, they were cornering me and saying, how could you be for Trump? And it's not like I'm raving, but he said he's been divorced 3 times or he's had 3 wives. And I go, so yeah, but don't you would you rather have
He's
Hillary?
not a war criminal.
I know it.
Hillary should be in The Hague right now. But the fact of the matter is only losers get dragged to The Hague for war crimes. The winners never get dragged there. What she did to Gaddafi, what she did to Libya were war crimes. There's no other word for them.
Yeah, one of your articles.
It may come out. Maybe this is what the whole email scandal is. There are rumors that she was shipping poison gas, sarin gas, to Syria. We know there was a poison gas attack.
To have a false flag.
A false flag. We know they had the false flag. That did happen. So it was it. We know the plan was there. The question is, what was her involvement? Well, maybe it's in the emails, but we don't need to know this. Everything that has been bad, will get worse under her. Because she is totally committed to everything that is wrong with America. From abortion to wars in the Middle East, she's for it.
Well, a friend of mine who's a Democrat for years, I said, well, there might even be people setting fires with this election. And she says, I don't care if half the country burns down. That's better than getting Hillary Clinton.
Yes.
And other people resonate with her saying that.
Actually, the word is out now. It looks as if the Democrats are getting cold feet about Hillary because they know I don't think she can't win against Trump. And people, first of all, the Bernie Sanders people will never vote for Hillary. They're not going to vote for her because you've got this huge core of support among Bernie Sanders people or 20-year-old women who are enslaved with debt.
And they could
crushing debt, slaves to debt because of the college education. And what is Hillary going to do about that? Nothing. Nothing. She is a defender of the oligarchs. Everything the oligarchs want, she does twice as much as they want because that's what her husband was. That's what they believe in. So in a sense, you have a choice if the right Trump shows up. But the question is the right Trump going to show up? And if he thinks he can finesse the Israel question, he's crazy. It's not going to happen. This is a guy who thinks he can schmooze everybody and come up with a good deal, but there are certain realities that you can't get around. And the main reality that you can't avoid at this point is it's America first or it's Israel first, and you can't have it both ways. Can't have it both ways.
Right. So, but in a sense, the worst case scenario is that Israel is completely our master. That's the worst case scenario. And you don't come out of that very easily. There's no easy solution. And people are thinking, well, Trump's going to lead us out? I mean, what are we actually under? What do you feel we're looking at?
Well, I think we're looking at a choice. We didn't have, how many elections have we had without a choice? The history of the Republican Party is to deny the people of America a choice. They will invariably come up with a loser so that the oligarchs can get their way by getting the Democrat elected. So obviously the classic example is Wendell Willkie, native son of Indiana. Nobody knew who Wendell Willkie was. Never heard of him. He was created by Life magazine. When they sent, and some public relations firm, they sent him out to Indiana, and there was a parade. It's one of the most famous photographs ever published in Life magazine of Wendell Willkie standing up in a
Convertible.
He was a total fall guy because the oligarchs wanted Roosevelt to win the election of 1940 because they wanted war, because they wanted to get into the war and preserve their foreign investments. That's what that was about. It happened again in my lifetime. Bob Dole. Remember Bob Dole? Mm-hmm. He ended up being a shill for Viagra. Okay? In 96, he was chosen as the nominee knowing that he would lose. Everybody knew he was going to lose. What was his job then? His job was to destroy what was left of Pat Buchanan's supporters in the Republican Party. It's that simple. So they're notorious for doing this. I don't think they can do it anymore. I don't think the Republicans can do it.
Because the impression is, and it's probably true, is that all their candidates are just shills for somebody. And
yeah, everybody knows that. Trump came across as being his own man. That's why he got the nomination. So they can't really go back on him. So the question is now, are they willing to do what has to be done, which is basically they have to repurpose the Republican Party as the party of the people, which is traditionally what the Democratic Party was. Remember? So you're going to have a complete reversal of the polls now. Now the Democratic Party is going to be the party of the CEO, oligarch, homosexual cabal. Okay? And the Republican Party is going to be the party of the poor white trash, manufacturing Midwest.
But aren't they hoping that the younger people kind of buy into the Democratic worldview, pro-homosexual, or, you know?
Sure. Bernie is obviously tapping a certain group of people, and if there's ever a group of people that has bought the mythology of homosexuality, it's the 20-year-olds. They're completely brainwashed on the issue of homosexuality.
Or they're intimidated.
Whatever it is, they are brainwashed. And so, but they're all in debt. And so it's just like the evangelicals in Indiana. Yes, we believe that God wants Israel strong, but we also have a job, and we're losing our job because it's being deported to Mexico. And so suddenly that becomes more important. Yeah. So it's the same thing. Yes, we're all, the 20-year-olds are all in support of homosexual rights, but they're in debt up to their eyeballs, and all they can get is an unpaid internship, and that's more important now. And Hillary can't touch these people. They're staying away in droves, as Sam Goldman would say.
Your next article was on Fichte, and you applied the theme of Kant and Fichte in how he was advocating a Germany that had borders, and then you brought that into this article. So
Trump, you were there. Trump said, if you don't have borders, you don't have a country. That is absolutely true. That's absolutely true. Now, he's got what I consider a completely idiotic solution to
build
this.
A wall.
Build a wall. Everybody roar, yeah, build a wall. No, you don't want to build a wall. You're wasting your time, everybody's time and effort. We can stop this. You can stop this. There are other ways to stop this. But, I mean, the principle is you have to secure your borders. Because if you don't, then all these people are going to infiltrate with drugs or terrorism or, you know, even if they're all saints coming across the border, you're driving wages down because you're increasing the number of people who are looking for work. And these people are willing to work for less. And as a result, the wages get driven down, and the thing is a mess. And this is one of the main things. And I think the people have a right to secure borders and to keep people out.
You wrote about this a long time ago, that the Roman Empire partly fell because they didn't secure their borders.
That's right. They did not. And the border at that time was the Danube, the main border. And why didn't they secure their borders? Because they were broke and they needed soldiers, and the Goths were willing to be soldiers. So they let the Goths cross the Danube and set up their settlements there, and that was a big mistake. Because assimilatio at the time of the Roman Empire meant you took a small group of whatever ethnic group it was, and you sent them to the farthest corner of the Roman Empire, farthest away from where they came from, so they had no one to talk to in their native language, and they eventually had to assimilate and become Romans in these little outposts of imperial culture. Well, when they ran out of money, because they debased the currency because of usury, because they had to make interest payments and they couldn't do it, and so they kept debasing the currency to continue to make usury interest payments. They ran out of soldiers. When they ran out of soldiers, they had to bring these people across, and the Goths became the soldiers. Well, that's okay as long as you pay them. And as soon as you stop paying them, well, then they have a life of their own, and then they take over, which is precisely what the Goths did. And that's why the Roman Empire became the Gothic kingdom in that period of time.
But there's a connection with today, because I read before that the reason the Roman Empire fell, according to one, was that the father became weak in the home. And if you have a strong father in the home, he's going to raise a strong son to be a soldier. But today, we want to draft the women, which is not the indicator of a strong father raising a strong son to protect the women.
No. It's a mercenary army to impose imperial control over the entire world. So who's going to be inspired by those ideals? What is the main reason people join the army now?
It's been for a long time, to get money.
Well, first of all, they're mercenaries. Okay, soldier means soldner, comes from soldner, which means mercenary. But why? What's the main reason driving that? Their need for money. What is it? It's debt.
They don't have a choice.
It's debt.
Yeah.
They are driven to become soldiers because of debt, usually education debt. And they go in for a certain period of time so that they can earn enough money to pay off their debts. Or they go in so that they can get an education without incurring debt. So there's always debt in the back of the picture.
Right,
and
but the mercenary element is probably the dominant
of course it
factor.
Of course it is. This is a mercenary army.
But they're supposed to be going to defend the Constitution, which is...
Well, this is preposterous.
Why
are we defending the Constitution in Afghanistan?
No.
Our illustrious mayor he's in the Navy.
There's no...
What's the biggest seaport of Afghanistan? Can you name the biggest seaport of Afghanistan? Because they don't have one. Because it's a landlocked country. So it's like absurdity upon absurdity. Why is Pete Buttigieg in Afghanistan? Well, he won't tell us. Because I suspect that he would get in trouble if he told us the real reason why he was in Afghanistan. But he said he was looking into drugs and money laundering and terrorism. So that probably is true, but probably not in the way he's telling it.
But when you join the military, you make an oath, not to the president, but to the Constitution, to defend it from internal and external enemies. Are there any internal enemies to the Constitution? Would the oligarchs,
Well, the oligarchs have already told us who the internal enemies are. So we had an uprising called Occupy Wall Street of precisely these 20-year-olds, and they were completely demonized by the oligarchs as a threat. Well, what's the threat? And then the FBI gets involved and starts worming its way in to destroy Occupy. Why are we doing this? Wait a minute. Aren't those people American citizens too? So what you're saying here is that the FBI is basically an agency of the oligarchs to break up anti-oligarch protest. Well, how does that square with representative government? So what you're seeing here is across the board, whether it's North Carolina and this ridiculous issue of transgender bathrooms or the Trump campaign, whatever. It's an uprising against oligarch control. It's a battle between representative government and the oligarchs.
But what is the sin of the oligarchs? Is it? I mean, we talked about. Is it
usury?
Covetous, but behind usury is covetousness.
Well, obviously, yes. Usury is simply the means whereby you can accumulate wealth without labor.
So they're just addicted to the sin of usury and covetousness.
This allows you to accumulate beyond anyone's wildest imagination.
So why would Jesus say it's near him? It's almost impossible. He almost says it that way for a rich person to get into the kingdom of God.
Because of what I said about nature and grace. The gravity of the sin is enormous. So you have two of the worst sins you can commit in alliance with each other: sodomy and usury. Dante puts the sodomite and the usurer in the same circle in hell. The sodomite takes what is fruitful and makes it sterile, namely sex. The usurer takes what is sterile, namely money, and makes it fruitful through compound interest.
Well, wouldn't you say that there's adultery, but Jesus said if you look at a woman with lust, you commit adultery in your heart. No one knows you've done it. You know you've done it, but there's no action taken. Usury is like covetousness in action. So in other words, if I went over to the neighbor's...
It's the mechanism that implements the covetousness.
But it's, right. So if I go over to the neighbor's house and sleep with the neighbor's wife, I've committed adultery.
Right.
But I may just see her and think it, but I haven't acted on it. But usury is covetousness in the heart.
In action.
In action.
Covetousness in action, yes. And the system of state-sponsored usury is capitalism.
But behind it is this allowance, and the church somehow, not really like Savonarola, not preaching against covetousness very effectively.
Well, we have a long list of sins against which the church does not preach. It's just a pathetic situation where basically they've been controlled by the regime, and all they can do is bleat about religious freedom, which is like, don't hurt me. Leave me alone. I won't bother you. You don't bother me. This is not the gospel of Jesus Christ.
But
this is the gospel of defeatism.
But Savonarola, back in the 13th, 14th century, he took the risk to preach against...
15th century.
He took the risk to preach against their covetousness and their usury. And what happened to him?
He got burned at the stake. Actually, no, they hanged him first, so he didn't get burned at the stake. They burned his body at the stake. But the Sodomites, it's the same story. The Sodomites and the usurers got together. They connived with the Pope, and the Pope basically got him condemned to death.
And probably some of the ministers and the priests feel
went along with it.
Well, today they're scared to really say something because there's going to be repercussions.
There's always repercussions. You can't tell the truth without being punished.
Right. I think we have 5 minutes left. Okay. I don't know if there was anything else that we wanted to cover. But no, you were saying, like after you wrote this, you were saying things have changed already.
Right. The big crisis now is it going to be, is Trump going to take Sheldon Adelson's money, number one? Is he going to appoint Newt Gingrich as his vice president? That will be the infallible sign that he has been corrupted by Adelson money. That is the end of America first. We're back to square one with Israel first. That's the whole problem.
So nothing
That's
of
a sign,
significance.
and at that point, I think a lot of people just lose heart and they don't vote. And if they don't vote, Hillary will win, and God help us if she wins. I mean, it's going to be everything bad will go to worse.
Right. But people like at the universities, my sister's at a university, I've talked to people that are high up at Notre Dame University, they seem to incline toward Hillary. What's the reason for that?
Because they're at universities. universities tend to be this way. They're bastions of political correctness. They're enforcers. It's like the pundits. The pundits are worse than the oligarchs. They're worse than the billionaires. Look at someone like George Will. He's going to lose his job. He's going to be downsized because nobody takes conservatism seriously anymore. Tough luck, George.
Right. So this is bringing things out a little bit.
Yep. Great moment.
Well, you were there I saw you down there when Trump came.
Yep.
And there was a sense that
the most important people in the room were not Trump and his entourage of basketball coaches. It was the people of Indiana, because they had suddenly become aware that things are not right and we're not going to take it anymore. That's the message.
Yeah, because I was there. I got VIP status. Okay?
Well, you are a VIP.
I got VIP,
you don't dress like one, but you are one.
I know.
You should take a page from Donald Trump.
What did he-
He's got the most expensive suits. I mean, his suits are impeccable. But anyway,
Well,
you're still a VIP.
But anyway, I was talking to those people. We had to wait an hour before Trump came.
Yeah.
And the guy behind me had just retired. He was from Valparaiso. And he was just talking about how it was when he grew up, And the story was his dad came back from World War II, and he came with his mom. They were engaged, and he started speaking at the table. It was Thanksgiving or something. And then
You're wrapping up now, right? This is the end.
Okay, we're wrapping up. But he said his dad walked over to him, his grandfather, because his dad spoke up and punched him right in the chin, knocked him out.
They're good old days, Peter.
But in other words, these guys, part of it is they want the good old days. They want discipline brought
Can't go back. Can't go back. You can only go forward.
So this is the show Israel, and the reflection on Israel is that the church is referred to in the New Testament as the Israel of God. Jesus is the Israel that brought the people out, the true Israel that brings us deliverance. And if you're looking to Christ and you believe on him, he is your deliverer to bring you out of your sin into the promised land. So we're blessed to have Mike Jones here, and hopefully he can come back on again.